enjoying that music. I know you were other people here have probably turned it off, but I was enjoying that music. Welcome, we're live now. Everybody else in Discord, you can unmute. Thanks to everybody in the chat saying happy birthday. Actually, Tom wasn't late this week. He joined in on his phone while he was rushing home to be in the Discord early, didn't you, Tom?
I didn't want to get roasted, but I checked the comments and everyone's still roasting me, so I feel like I can never get away from this. It's just the way it is. I will always be Tom the Late.
Exactly. But it fits, right? If the shoe fits.
It sounds like some kind of like fucking Game of Thrones character name, like Sir Tom the Late or something.
The shoe fits though. I wonder if Harrison will show up, right? He's meant to be here for the first birthday special of his own organisation. He's not here. So Harrison's at the football, of course. So hopefully he'll be joining us at some point and you can roast him for being late. How about that? Tom, you've muted yourself. How about that, I said?
Oh, yeah. I will certainly join in on that when that happens.
Nice. Sammy, say hello. Sammy! I don't know what this guy's about. Can anyone hear Sammy, right?
No, he's on Halo, isn't he?
Yeah.
Halo 6 or whatever.
He's playing games. Sammy, we can't hear you. Sort your mic out. We'll come back.
It's not broken, I just have push to talk.
Yeah, well then push to talk then. You're live on to the masses. I'm trying to introduce you to the show.
What?
Yeah, we're live, right?
They're funny.
Get your head out of the clouds.
I realised that. What?
I said get your head out of the clouds, we're live. I was introducing you. Say hello to the people and thank them for being your listener.
Hello everyone, I'm back from the clouds.
You're back from the clouds. Right, anyway, Jen, you're joining us. Welcome.
Hello everyone. How's everyone?
Good. It's nice to have you back.
Yeah.
You should be here more often. Right. Also, in the top corner, painting live, as always. Let me just get it up on the screen so you can all see. We have Artsy. Can you hear
Also,
us?
make yourself live, Fran.
Oh yeah, you want to be able to see. Sorry, Artsy. Say that again.
I just said hello.
Nice, hello. What are you painting for us this week?
Bob Ross Soviet space landscape. I haven't done one of those in a while, so I thought it would be fun to do another really pretty landscape. But I have zero plan at all for what I'm going to do beyond that. So
nice.
We'll see. Yeah.
Nice. I mean,
can you put a mango in it somewhere, like a tiny mango?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic.
Nice. Tony,
mango tree.
Tony there.
Yes.
Happy first birthday. Thanks, Tony. Always a pleasure to see you in there. Always a pleasure to have you as our Patreon still as well, Tony. So thanks for that. Let's go on with the show. Sammy, you're first up because you've got quite a lot you want to talk about, so you best get used to that push to talk button, right?
Yep.
So the first article you sent is about Iran's fuel shipment to Lebanon, right?
Yeah, so recently the second ship has arrived to the Bernias port in Syria. They're going to be later
give us a quick recap of what's going on for people who don't know.
Well, basically, a few months ago, Lebanon, as we all know, was experiencing a fuel crisis and subsequently an electricity crisis, along with the currency plummeting and such.
Mm-hmm.
So the Americans weren't allowing the Lebanese to import fuel shipments from Iran using the Lebanese currency instead of the US dollar, or from any other place. So basically, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has said that if the government doesn't sort its crap out, basically, and get a fuel source somehow, then we're going to just buy fuel from Iran using the Lebanese currency, and then we're going to sell it at zero profit.
Nice.
Which promptly, literally 2 hours after that speech, the US ambassador to Lebanon phoned up the Lebanese president and said that they are now allowed, or they granted permission for Lebanon to get gas from Egypt via Jordan and Syria. So they were kind of like forced into a corner with this move. Now the second fuel shipment has arrived to Beni-Esport in Syria, where it will be unloaded onto trucks and then transported to Lebanon by land. This has effectively broken the economic siege of the country. So the first oil shipment was 80 trucks, and they stated out that the institutions that they were prioritizing to give the fuel for free were public hospitals, publicly owned hospitals, nursing and care homes for the elderly, orphanages, and a couple of other institutions. And then the institutions they'd sell at a reduced cost, like not at 0% profit margin.
Right.
Even less than that, they'd sell it to bakeries, water facilities, water purification facilities, and religious.
Yes. Sammy, you broke up a little bit there, right? Sammy.
I've got not a question, but kind of an observation about this as well. I think it was the USA trying to kind of mitigate this situation where obviously Hezbollah was buying oil off Iran. Is it Hezbollah who are doing this, Sammy, directly, or is it just the Lebanese state?
It's through Hezbollah, as far as I know.
Yeah, well, basically the USA panicked because they realised that, obviously this would only strengthen the alliance between Iran and Hezbollah, which doesn't need strengthening anyway. But what they did was they allowed a reopening of certain oil pipelines that transited through Syria. So they accidentally undid some of their sanctions on Syria to kind of stop the Iranians from gaining on this deal, or stop the further gain of the Iranians, which I just think is hilarious. It's US sanctions are literally shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, I mean they'll do that though, won't they? As soon as, does that not just prove that it's completely, for one, it proves that they're completely unnecessary, doesn't it? Because they can just switch them off whenever it feels like it. And two, it proves that they can literally just switch them off whenever they feel like it, right? So if they're going to do it for that, then why can't they just do it in general? Sammy, you back?
Yeah, the internet cut out a bit, student accommodation.
All right, carry on.
So, where did I cut off from?
Tom, where do you cut off? You were just talking about the church, the institutions that were given fuel. And also, Tom asked you a question. Tom asked, is it the state or is it just Hezbollah that's doing this?
Yeah, the Lebanese state isn't in a position to import, as I said earlier. It's not in a position to import from whoever they please, basically,
right.
In order to solve, or at least partially solve, the economic crisis they're going through. Because
I was just...
you have
Sorry, go on.
several... Yeah, that's right. You have several elements within the Lebanese state, such as the fascist Lebanese Forces Party, which is headed by Samir Jaja, essentially. And it's been long known, via WikiLeaks and stuff, that he was on the payroll of Saudi Arabia or the US via Saudi Arabia and other kinds of NGOs. So, basically, effectively, Lebanon was under siege.
I was also saying, just before you cut off, are you still there?
Yeah, I am still here.
Oh, okay, cool. Basically, that I'd read somewhere, I can't even remember where now, that essentially the USA has had to undo some of its sanctions on Syria as a way to bypass to get oil back into Lebanon, presumably through their proxy forces, like the fascists you just mentioned there. Because they obviously don't want the Lebanon-Iran ties to be strengthening. And I just found that absolutely hilarious that the sanctions are having to, the sanctions are all kind of causing problems for each other.
What you're talking about is the American ambassador announcing that they're going to start allowing Jordanian electricity to be transported through Syria, and as well as Egyptian gas to be transported through Jordan and Syria through the Arab pipeline, which actually needs 6 months to rehabilitate and get going again. So it's not an instant thing. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say about this. And also the other two institutions that would be included to get the fuel as grants for free are like religious institutions like the church of like different churches such as the Orthodox, the Catholic churches, as well as mosques. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this. However, I would say that this is a very good start in like economic cooperation between the surrounding countries. Like, this is a very good start for good cooperation, and like, I think it won't solve the crisis because yeah, now I remember what I wanted to say. A few weeks ago, one of the leadership, or a prominent figure in the fascist Lebanese forces, Ibrahim al-Saqr, he's like a guy who owns several petrol stations. And when the Lebanese state kind of decided to clamp down a little bit on the fuel shortage and like force petrol stations to open their doors because the syndicates had closed it because they were protesting, they wanted higher prices essentially.
Right.
They found, with Ibrahim Saqr alone, from the Lebanese fascist parties, who were the same people who are accusing Hezbollah of all of being the reason for all of the corruption and the collapse of the economy, essentially. They found with him, in his possession, at least 2 million litres of petrol, which is enough for 100,000 cars. Not only that, but
where do you keep
a few
that?
days later, they found an additional 2 million litres. So in total, he had hoarded 4 million litres worth of petrol.
How many is that in Olympic swimming pools? 4 million litres.
I don't even know, to be honest, but we know that is enough to fill up 200,000 cars.
If it wasn't so like evil, that'd be so funny. Like obviously it's very evil, which stops it from being like funny. But like if you think about it, it just like I just got this image of like Hezbollah just opening a garage and there's just like millions of jerry cans just sat there, and he's like, "That wasn't me."
Another actually funny event that happened was that the new Lebanese Prime Minister, who's by the way a billionaire, tells you a lot about what he's like. He commented on the fact that Hezbollah brought in the fuel from Syria, and he said, this is a breach of Lebanese sovereignty, whatever his definition of sovereignty is, considering he can't do shit about getting fuel in by himself. And apparently the parliament building, or the building where the parties were supposed to meet to give confidence to give a vote of confidence to the newly appointed prime minister and government, that ran out of power because of fuel shortage, and they had to basically call to get some fuel from this same Iranian shipment, obviously at zero profit and a reduced cost, which is kind of ironic and funny, really.
I mean, it's hilarious just how, like Tom was saying, it's hilarious how these sanctions can be just turned on and off, as much as it's hilarious that like getting fuel like bad. Bringing fuel into the country is like against its sovereignty or something, whilst people have no electricity. Like, what do you want? Basically, you're saying I'm annoyed that this is being circumvented, right? That's literally what you said.
This is exactly how like the NGOs kind of operate their speech, and as well as like the Saudi-funded channels. I don't say this out of conspiracy, by the way. It's literally proven by WikiLeaks. Like basically there were WikiLeaks or letters from WikiLeaks saying, like there was a letter from the Saudi government to, I think it was MTV Lebanon, not the MTV franchise, that's a different thing, basically saying, we're gonna donate like 100,000 to you as long as you publish this and that. So anyway,
just before you move on from that point, I just want to point out that, like, I mean, I know we're going to go into this a bit later on when we talk about the economic situation of the world, but, like, obviously at the minute, Britain's suffering from a major fuel crisis themselves. I don't know whether you guys have seen anything, but, like, all of the petrol stations near my house are completely empty. Like, they literally have ran out of fuel.
Yeah, I've heard as well, yeah.
There was, like, hour-long queues, like, roads are blocked and everything just up by me. Now imagine if like Boris tried to buy some oil from France and like I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn came out and said, "Nah, this is an attack on
British sovereignty.
this is an attack on British sovereignty."
Or the other way around. No, it's more like the other way around. It's more like it's more like Jeremy Corbyn buying some fuel from France and Boris being like, that's an attack on our sovereignty.
To be a bit more accurate, it's like the UK was split up into 3 countries: Scotland, England, and Wales, and I'm sure that's what some people like. However, like we're talking in a colonial sense, and like Britain was not allowed to import oil from Scotland, who control the North Sea and North Sea oil. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Sammy, you have to be hyper realistic, don't you? Like I was just trying to make a funny comparison. You're like, well, actually,
but isn't it? It's a fair point to raise, right? These like supply issues that are happening in the West right now, due to like COVID supply issues, mismanagement of like Western society because of their responses to COVID, etc. So like we're seeing what sanctions do to a country, but like for other reasons. It's like naturally happening now, isn't it?
Yeah, but obviously with sanctions it'll be like on a much higher scale, and I think that's a big reason why people don't understand exactly what the effect of sanctions is. Yeah,
people in Lebanon don't have electricity for the entire day, do they? I mean, imagine that. Living in the Western world, imagine that, right? And not having electricity for how many hours a day would you say people in Beirut have electricity?
As far last I heard was that it's 4 hours, and
4 hours per day.
Companies threatened to they even now saying that they might have to reduce it to 2 hours a day because of the ongoing fuel shortage.
See what I mean? Imagine being imagine just London having 4 hours of electricity a day, and you can only charge your phone and check Twitter and play Fortnite for 4 hours a day.
I saw this like thing a couple of weeks ago. I think it was on either Sky News or BBC News, because they're the shitty bourgeois news stations my parents watch. And essentially, it was going around a hospital in Beirut and showing the impact of like the fuel crisis and all this. And the hospital was completely shut down. None of the machines could work. Like there were cancer patients like saying, "Oh, our radiography machines aren't working," and all this kind of stuff. And it had like a really sad tone to it, like when they do like atrocity porn and they're like, look at how poor these people are, but they didn't mention like once the fact that it was completely under economic siege from the USA, and that is the primary reason. But also they didn't mention the fact, didn't mention the fact that this is all, again, as Sammy says, a result of British imperialism from however many years ago. Is it British Lebanon, or was that France? French
it's a bit of both, isn't it? It's a bit of both, isn't it? But to be the tail end is French imperialism, right? It's France that gave it its current.
It's the whole point, though, isn't it? Like when you're watching these British channels, and I'm sure America maybe does the same if they even bother to show it, and they're like going around going like, "Oh, look how sad this is. Look at how poor the people are. Poor Lebanon and all this." And you're like, "Well, lift the fucking embargo, then, you absolute bastards." You know what I mean? It's not hard.
Now, if anyone wants to know more about Lebanon, there's a good documentary on Redfish's YouTube. If you've never ever looked into Lebanon, it's a good start. Sammy, I'm pretty sure you can vouch for that, right?
Yeah, I was actually quite impressed with Redfish's short 20-minute documentary. It really gave... It basically gave the context, what people need to know in terms of the context for Lebanon. And I think that's quite a good start.
What is it called? The documentary?
Let me find it right this second. It's on Redfish. Redfish's YouTube. The art. It's called Guns for Food. The US war on Hezbollah and Lebanon Shia. 25 minutes long. It's a good documentary.
Cool.
But yeah, it's good to see those sanctions being lifted, isn't it? And it's good to know that the resistance is growing in not only Palestine but in Lebanon as well, and in Iran through their own foreign policy gains that they're making. The whole region seems to be standing up on its own, which is just what is that not what internationalism is, right? Every country of the world standing up on its own. Yes.
Speaking of games, there have been huge gains made in Yemen in the past week.
Let's go. I've got your article up, Sammy.
Just before we continue with this, I just want to point out that Harrison's just messaged us. He's not going to be on the cast because he is, in his own words, extremely pissed with his dad.
So you're giving me shit, like, for leaving at 11 to hang around, and...
Don't worry.
Harrison's like, oh, I'm too drunk to join.
He's just a disgrace, Sammy. You don't want to be a disgrace as well, do you?
Maybe a quarter of that.
Try and get him on,
So anyway.
because he can come on if he's drunk. It'd be hilarious.
Yeah, game one.
I'm sure the viewers want to get him on. Tom, your job is to convince Harrison that he's got to come on. It won't be hard, he's drunk.
Sake.
Convince him. Sammy, Yemen forces just 50 kilometres away from Marib province's capital. Go.
Yes, so on the 16th of September, or on the 17th of September, the Yemeni army spokesperson announced that Yemeni armed forces revealed details of the quote-unquote Great Might operation, which led to the large-scale military. It was the large-scale military operation in Matrib governance, and we talked about before how Matrib was quite a strategic area in Yemen, and how Saudi-backed forces were clinging on to that eventually. Moving on, which led to the liberation of large areas of the province. The map is coming in a bit, and also led to.
Do you want me to get the map up?
Yeah, it'll be good to get up now. And also led to significant losses among coalition aggression in terms of mercenaries and vehicles and equipment and such. He announces the total number of missiles that were used in this operation were 1,610, including 1,200 operations within Yemen,
Right, what's this map?
Okay, so this... Alright, so this is a map of the north of the Matrib province, where this big operation was carried out, as I mentioned, and where they destroyed... Let me just double check. Yeah, they included 300. The drone force operations are 319. He said losses amount to damage and burning of approximately 1,500 vehicles, armored vehicles, military vehicles, and troop carriers. In addition to the destruction of several weapon depots, one of the most notable results of the Great Might operation is the seizure of large quantities of heavy, medium, and light weapons. And but not to mention also the capture of several strategic roads that lead to the capital, which is kind of what the title suggested, that they're only now 50 kilometers away from the capital of the Matrib province, which essentially is like the last stand.
Yes.
Pretty much. And a few days after that...
So hold on. Just is this, on this map, the bottom left corner one, is that the entire... Is that all of Yemen, right?
Yeah, that's the entirety of Yemen.
Right, so we're looking at this central province, right? And then the top left is the area of that province that is going on in, right?
Yes, and the green color is the areas that were liberated, while the red colors are still the areas controlled by Saudi-backed forces as well as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Because, as we know, a few months ago, they started deploying Al-Qaeda, kind of in the north, mostly in the south of Marib, to kind of like fend off the offensive of the popular committees.
Right. So haven't the imperialists and Saudi Arabia been trying to withdraw at the minute as well?
They haven't been exactly withdrawing. They tried to make a few months ago. They tried to make a ceasefire, which did not come to fruition because they were basically, I can't remember exactly what the terms were, but they were still like holding on to too much. So those negotiations did not lead to a ceasefire. which I think is kind of good because a ceasefire would be more like would allow them to kind of like restructure their forces,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Saudis, and give them a bit more.
The last thing that a country wants is a Syria situation where the civil war lasts for 10 years, or even worse, a Korea situation where the occupation just sets in.
Yeah, and this map that you're currently seeing now is actually in El Baydat province, which is below Maghreb, also a strategic area. This area was actually liberated from mostly Al-Qaeda fighters, which, as I said, they started deploying a few months ago to fend off the offensive. And this one was called Operation Dawn of Freedom, which resulted in the liberation of the green areas, as we see here. And this, I think, is basically like the door. It was like entering the door of the liberation of Maghreb, pretty much. Like where.
Yeah. If you look in the bottom left, you can see the provinces right at the bottom of the province you were just talking about before, right?
Also Maghreb. Also, if they liberate that entire province, that would essentially almost cut off the stream or the logistics from the second capital, Aden, the capital of the government, like the Saudi-backed government, and Maghreb province. So the two last operations over the past few days really have been a stride, honestly.
Nice.
Is this purely an attack on the logistics lines? Because obviously if you cut off the kind of resupply routes and stuff like that, then that's the easiest way to encircle and
yeah, I think Al Baydat province was like the main logistic line between the capital and Maghreb, the second capital, I mean.
Right, I see. Okay, that's big then.
Mm-hmm. But as I say, are the Saudis not wanting to get this war wrapped up? Like, in terms of, it seems like
they kind of want it.
Go on.
From what I can see, they want to wrap it up before they start losing any more. That's how they want to do it. However, they also can't exactly put it to an end because that would demonstrate a loss for them, a loss for a war on Yemen, which would be a huge embarrassment.
But are they,
and also would represent a victory
is the imperialist? Are they really bothered about losing? Like the US are not bothered about losing, really, are they? Because they've not lost, have they? They've not lost because they've managed to make bank whilst they've occupied and sell X amount of military gear, and
Well,
the
not
US.
Just that. It's about.
Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's not just about losing. It's more about having a really strategic location, such as Yemen is an entry point to the Red Sea as well as the Gulf, and essentially on Saudi Arabia's front door. Mm-hmm. They don't want that region becoming, well, it's already a member of the Axis of Resistance, but they don't want Yemen as a whole united as an Axis member.
This to me seems a bit like Sammy, I don't know whether this is an accurate comparison, but when the Japanese justified their invasion and occupation and annexation of the Korean peninsula, they referred to it as a dagger pointed at the heart of the island of Japan. That was what Korea was. It was like a vital, that was the verbiage they used. They used the term a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan. Now it seems to me, based on what I can see from the maps, that Yemen is essentially a dagger pointed at the heart of Saudi Arabia if it were to fall completely under the influence of the Axis of Resistance.
That is correct, and that's partly why, mostly why back in the days of socialist South Yemen, when the communist revolution spelt over into Oman, like all reactionary forces put all of their efforts into trying clamping down and suppressing that revolution in Oman, especially with the help of pre-revolutionary Iran with the Shah. Like the Shah provided most of the services basically in trying to clamp down or suppress the communist revolution in Oman. So having again south of the Arab Peninsula as an anti-imperialist force, even geopolitically, would be a severe blow to the imperialist axis. Because over the past year almost, I think, we've seen an imperialist axis kind of come to fruition or crystallize with the Arab normalization of reactionary Arab states with the Zionist entity, like Bahrain, almost Qatar and Saudi Arabia. They just need a bit of a push, or to bring it to public, because it's already under the table. Egypt and Jordan have been long-time normalizers. So we see now that the two opposing sides are really starting to take form.
It's getting a lot more, and it seems to be that there is it leftist? It seems to be so. It's definitely mass people-led movements. I don't know whether it's leftist in the traditional sense that like they study Marxism, because when you've got the US droning
A good chunk of them do.
When you've got US droning you to shit, it's kind of not the main priority, is it? To teach, you do it after, but
this coming article.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to introduce into. Is it as left as, because it's not spoken about, right? People in the West don't know this.
Now, as a whole, Ansarullah, which is represented by the popular committees as well as all of the various political parties that were a part of the Yemeni revolution in September 2014, that's basically Ansarullah, and the Yemeni Socialist Party split into two sections.
Rune, the author of this article.
It didn't split.
Before you carry on, Rune, the author of this article, is a mutual of ours, I believe.
Yes. Well, it did split. Essentially, a few reactionaries left the party and formed like the Yemeni Socialist Party, Social Democratic faction, which is like allied with Emirates and the secessionists in the current reactionary secessionists in the south. But that's kind of another story. The Yemeni Socialist Party, which is ML, they form a part of Ansarullah and the government of revolutionary Yemen. They are certainly a part of that, and they do form a good chunk of it. Like I think 15% maybe they formed in the last parliament or last elections. However, as a whole, yes, they are a mass movement with popular committees, and that's what they are based on, and that's how they survived since the bombing campaign started in May 2015. Like they get their base of support from all of these popular committees, and that's what gives them. That's what also like a good chunk of the militia is based on.
Mm-hmm. And is that the same with like Hezbollah and stuff like that documentary that we were talking about? It shows you. It talks about like their like poverty alleviation campaigns that are are stocking shelves whilst sanctions are keeping them empty, and it shows you like elder Lebanese talking about like they have the backing of the people and stuff, and it's almost getting into like People's War, Maoist sort of revolutionary territory like that, right? Is it not? They're using the similar sort of. They're just not dressed with hammer and sickles. That's all.
It is very similar, yes. They have like a religious, but they mostly just have like a religious theme to them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's the it's Islam that unites them, right? Rather than Marxist socialism or whatever.
It also seems to me that like if you kind of avoid sticking a hammer and sickle on your movement, it takes the target a bit off your back. Like not so much.
Lebanon sanctioned to hell.
Yeah, I'm not saying completely, but what I'm saying is if they were literally marching in the streets like with fucking pictures of Lenin and stuff.
Hold on, am I right to suggest though? Lebanon has like a comprador-ish government, a centrist comprador-ish government, and then is that right, Sammy?
Yes, that's correct.
Exactly. So, and even that government is facing sanctions, right? So, I'd say it doesn't matter really whether you fly one or not. They'll still sanction you.
No, I'm not
just
saying
as sanctioned as the DPRK or Cuba, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that it would defend and protect you from it. but like it's what I'm saying is if the fucking revolutionaries
Well, Sammy,
in
they
Yemen,
have 4 hours electricity a day. Of course they are. Carry on, Tom. Sorry.
if the revolutionaries in Yemen came out and said like, look, we're gonna overthrow the centrist state and reform it under a Marxist Hezbollah-led government and all this, like immediately you'd have like the US war hawks calling for their involvement in the bombings against them rather than just
Do they
the
not
Saudi
call
ones.
for their involvement anyway, though? That's what I'm getting at, right?
No, I think they just kind of let the Saudis do their dirty work for them here, don't they?
But they'll go after the right wing if it suits when they're going after.
No, I know. I'm not saying
or the Taliban.
No,
or
of
whatever.
course, I'm not
or
saying
Noriega or.
I know. I'm not saying it protects you from it. What I'm saying is you've got more of a target on your back if you openly call yourself communist. Is what I'm saying. Even if you are doing very much so communist shit, like what you're saying, like it's essentially Maoism, like actual Maoism, not like weird Western left Gonzaloism nonsense, boiling dogs. You haven't seen any dogs getting boiled.
It's to suit the situation of Lebanon, right? Because because the masses are living under sanction with nothing. Shops have got no food. When people, I mean, living in the West, you don't understand what sanctions mean, because at any point that we choose right now, we can just jump on our phone and go to an app and get some teenager to bring us a loaf of bread from the shop using Deliveroo or whatever app. In Lebanon, we're talking about shops that don't even have daily bread there for people.
Absolutely.
And the reason why these movements are socialist without having to be called that is because, I mean, well, it's like Lenin, isn't it? Demanded bread, because socialism answers these questions easier than anything else, so naturally these movements seem to follow a leftist alignment, right?
That's what I'm getting at. I mean, you don't have to call yourself Leninists to be Leninists, is what I mean. But what I'm getting at is that, like, if you do go walking around with big red flags and stuff when you're doing your drone attacks on Saudi infrastructure, it's whereas we hear about it very, very rarely on the news. Like, very rarely do you hear Yemen brought up nowadays, unless it's just talk about
hold on, I'm not going to mention anywhere specific because, but there are quote-unquote socialist areas of the world that get all the attention of the West, right? Exactly. In a good way, though, right? As if they're like the heroes. I'm not saying, places in Syria. Naming no specific regions, places in Syria that are quote-unquote communist or socialist or anarchist. Maybe,
but the thing is, though, they very clearly. No, but they very clearly aren't, is what I'm getting at. Like, they might say, oh, we're anarchists, but in reality, this area that we aren't naming might then go and sell oil to the US Air Force or refuel US planes. So very clearly, they are not ideologically aligned with the anti-imperialist movement. Whereas if you've got a group that are, like, just, as I say, committing attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure or whatever, if they were doing that with, like, Marxist drones that were painted red with a hammer and sickle on each wing, like, you would absolutely see that in the news a lot more. And that's what I'm getting at. I mean, like, I feel like not openly defining it, one, it lets your movement be more broad, because obviously if you're just calling it like a people's war against the Saudi Arabian terrorists or whatever, then you're going to get more support than if you're calling it like, a protracted Marxist Maoist people's war, because obviously that invites sectarian infighting and stuff. Then it seems like it allows it to be more broad church, and two, it prevents it from getting a significant, like, scary big eye of the media on top of it.
Okay, well,
that's how I see it.
This brings me on to another question that, hold on, before I ask it, I'm going to introduce Zena, because she's joined the show. If you want to unmute yourself and say hello, Zena, if you can, say hello. But welcome back after all this time.
Graham.
It's a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
It's been a while.
Right. Maybe you can answer this question in relation to what Tom was saying then. But did when the revolution was happening in Russia and China, did every group have to be socialist or flying a red flag to join that movement, or did it sort of just naturally collect allies along the way? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about Russia, but in China, it's definitely like everyone definitely can join the same team, regardless if you're in really join the Communist Party or not. I mean, this really happens like maybe before the Civil War or something.
Mm-hmm.
Even after the Civil War, you can still join the party. I mean, like the 3 and the 5 stars on our flag.
Yes.
Literally represents the five different people in our country, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
even
the 5 class
included,
groups.
yeah, basically like that. Yeah.
But I mean, I think
To answer your question, so I think if you are still like even maybe after the Communist Party took over, I'm not sure. I think in that way you probably need to join the Communist Party. After maybe 1949 or later, you might need to join the Communist Party. So I mean, you have to prove you prove yourself to look to the country, right?
I think just to come in on that as well, Fran, I just want to say, like, I feel like back when the USSR was having its revolution, obviously they could only ally the peasantry and the working classes together because the bourgeoisie had its own interests, the liberals had their own interests, the Tsar had his own interests. When it came to China, it was a much broader church because obviously the peasantry class was enormous, like 4 times the entire Russian population at that point in time. It made up the majority of the people, and there was no point saying like, oh, you need to be a communist peasant. If you just say to the peasant, look, we're going to kill that landlord that's like enslaving your family. Yeah. But what I'm getting at is after those 2 revolutions succeeded, and the Vietnamese Revolution as well, which kind of followed a similar path. Now I feel like there is so much sectarianism that calling yourself a specific sect of leftism would ostracize people who, because of anti-communist propaganda that's so inherent to the world as a result of McCarthyism and other factors like this, the Cold War, the attacks on China today. It's like if a socialist movement aligns itself with China today, like you've got half of Twitter calling them like revisionist scum. So like, and that's the left side of Twitter. That's not even like the fascists or the reactionaries or the liberals or anything. That's the actual quote unquote leftists who so that's what I'm getting at. I feel like conditions today are very different to conditions in obviously 1949, 1911, 1917.
But what stops that from happening in the West compared to say Lebanon, where movements can start joining together through? Is it the fact that Westerners just don't realise that they're born? Do you get what I mean? Is it a case of that? Is it the fact that we've not really felt it bad enough to just be like, yeah, like you said then, they didn't go around saying you must be a communist peasant, but they went and answered the peasant's question and went, right, if you want to kill your landlord, right, join with us, right? Do you know what I mean? They just answered the questions, didn't they? It doesn't matter what flag they've got because they're answering the question. It doesn't matter whether you are the most top grade Marxist that can analyse everything with a Marxist twist, right? You've not done a 5,000 word essay on Shrek or from a Marxist perspective or whatever. But it's just the fact that you join the movement because it serves you better, right? So is it a case of that in the Middle East that means that these movements generally tend to be of the left? Because fascism is the other side, right? Fascism can only work with capitalists funding it, but the other side doesn't have capitalist funding, so it's got to rely on Chairman Mao's idea of the masses, hasn't it?
I think with that as well, like when you say are the people too coddled in the West, I don't think you used the word coddled, but like that's basically the upshot of it, isn't it? I mean, like in the West, as you say, you can just order some poor minimum wage delivery boy to ride through the rain to bring you a McDonald's, whereas these countries are under absolute real siege warfare. They're like literally like under a medieval siege, and they I suppose the people look at who their government is, and they're like, well, my government is collaborating with the people that are starving us. My government are capitalists. My government are fascists. So we need to turn to the people that aren't fascists and aren't capitalists to try and find a way out of this. And that's always the left, isn't it? Whether that be, I don't know, a people's resistance movement like Hezbollah, or whether that be like the Workers' Party of Korea. You know, it's the it doesn't matter whether you're flying the hammer and sickle. It's whether you've got the will of the masses in mind, whether you will be successful or not. That's all that matters, really.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like Mao himself, like he went. I mean, Zeno, you'd be able to come in on this. Like, Mao's whole thing was like, well, the proletariat are not developed yet in China. Like, they only exist in the large port cities, which are absolutely indentured with foreign troops. And every time we try to have a workers' uprising, they get slaughtered, like, because there's not enough of them. So let's look at the 400 million peasants that live in the countryside that all have grievances and make them into the army, because there's going to be a peasant revolution anyway. Whether we can mold this peasant revolution into a people's war, that might be the better way of doing it. I don't know what you think about that, Zeno. I think it just always goes to like kind of the material conditions without using that term, because obviously it's overused. But the material conditions of a country obviously will be what leads that revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I it's definitely material condition is definitely a very, very important factor.
Yeah, I mean, and Sammy, with regards to Yemen, I mean, the conditions mean that you need to fund the guys that are fighting back against the Saudis, and that is not the puppet government is it in the north, the puppet government? Or
no, the puppet government is in the. It's a bit complicated because the puppet government is kind of split between the reactionary secessionists and the puppet government that controls pretty much the whole of South Yemen. But essentially, Ansarullah, the revolutionary government, is in North Yemen.
Right, I see. And that is that like a flip of socialist Yemen? Because wasn't socialist Yemen South Yemen?
Yeah, exactly. It is a flip.
Right, it's bizarre, but I mean, I suppose it's just wherever the reactionaries place themselves.
I was going to say, like, if you want like a good context and overview of like how the events in Yemen since 2014 and a bit before that panned out, and the context to that as well, this article on screen right now is an excellent introduction, and it gives you basically all you need to know for context of what's happening.
Do you want me to just? Is it long? It's not, is it? I'll read it out.
It's not that. It's like a 10-15 minute.
I'll read it. I'll read it. Yemenis were punished for claiming their right to self-determination, punished for demanding to live in a free, prosperous, and democratic nation. On July 30th.
So like the first like 3 paragraphs, they give a good context for it.
All right. On July the 30th, 2014. See, I didn't even know this. This is the first I'm hearing of this 2014 revolution in Yemen, right? The Yemeni government at the time introduced several austerity measures as a prerequisite for obtaining a loan from the IMF. One of these measures to increase the fuel prices, a service that has been historically subsidised for many years, having witnessed the collapse of Ali Abdullah Saleh's government in 2012 and an uneasy national dialogue. Is that the government? National dialogue, it's capitalised. Is that the name for their parliament? Sammy?
Yeah, that's the post-2014 government.
Parliament, right, okay. The national dialogue, while state affairs were effectively put to a standstill, the Yemeni people poured into the streets in defiance, not solely in defiance against an increase in fuel prices, which would severely impact the quality of life in the already poverty-stricken country, but in defiance against malign foreign interference, which has yet again made life difficult for the ordinary Yemeni citizen. Spearheaded by the Ansarullah movement, the Yemeni people reignited the spirit of revolution in every corner of the Yemeni Republic. They had suffered under a regime of guardship to Saudi Arabia, the US, and its state-run NGOs and think tanks for many decades. This time was different. There was no reluctance.
Can I stop you a sec? Sammy, what does Ansarullah actually mean? Does it, or is it just a name? Does Ansarullah actually mean something, or is it just a name?
Yeah, it's an Arabic word, and the literal translation doesn't make sense. Well, I suppose I could draw a bit of a parallel with like a Christian slogan kind of thing. Ansarullah literally means those who the oppressed people who vouch or like. It's a bit complicated. Give me a minute. Sorry.
All right.
Okay, no worries.
I'll keep reading here. This time was different. There was no reluctance amongst the protesters and citizens alike, and the end goals were unified. Ansarallah's leader, Saeed Abdul Malek Badreddin al-Houthi, made plea after plea on television to the government of how's this?
It's easy for you to say that.
Adabra Mansour Hadi. Either you withdraw your austerity measures, or the people will be forced to take matters into their own hands. And so they did. On September the 21st, 2014, the Ansarullah and the People's Committees stormed the capital in Toyota Technicals and armed with Kalashnikov rifles. It's always Soviet gear, isn't it? Soviet stuff built to last. Cheaply being passed around and liberating peoples around the world. Anyway, and effectively seized control of the country. The ensuing night sky lit up with fireworks and cries of joy. The takeover of the capital remained largely peaceful, with only sporadic clashes in the preceding offensive. It marked the first time an armed revolution had seen tangible results in the country since South Yemen gained its independence from the UK in November 1967. What then happened has so far remained largely ignored in the corporate Western press. Soldiers of the Yemeni army joined hands with Ansarullah and were tasked to guard the state institutions and other public buildings. Ansarullah and a number of political parties organised their own national dialogues in order to find an agreeable, lasting solution to Yemen's many dire problems. Banners were raised on all major streets with the inscription, Sami, I'm going to butcher this, Aradat Ashab.
Iradat al-Shab, the will of the people.
There you go. Streets were named after Yemen's long list of anti-imperialist icons, nationalists and socialists alike. A course was set to free the country from the scourge of foreign guardianship and to reinstate true independence with respect to the people's right to self-determination. The Peace and National Partnership Agreement, proposed by the UN and signed by all parties, constituted the new legal framework on which Yemen was to base its newfound trajectory. Everything was looking positive. Former UN envoy to Yemen, Jamal Ben Omar, once proclaimed that the many Yemen political parties were close to a power-sharing deal that would effectively see the reintroduction of a bipartisan democratic system with its first free election in years. I mean, surely Westerners who love freedom and democracy would be foaming at the mouth at that idea, right? If they had any principles, that was. Yemen's president Hadi had resigned from his position as president to the Yemeni House of Representatives in January 2015, and in February that same year, that Ansarullah went forth with a constitutional declaration that would see the revolutionary leadership vanguardized and the system reformed under classic socialist and anti-imperialist lines. The government was absorbed and the Revolutionary Committee was to take charge of all state affairs on interim and transitional basis. The people were now in direct control of all state affairs, circumventing the kleptocratic bureaucracy built up by Saleh and preceded by Hadi.
It sounds exactly like the the Bolshevik Revolution almost to a T, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like just every single. If you were saying this and not saying all the Arabic names, just saying a basic outline, this could be the Bolshevik Revolution.
Mm-hmm. Escaping house arrest, Yemen's resigned President Hadi then fled to Aden on the 21st of February, where he proclaimed to remain the president and called upon Saudi Arabia to form an international coalition that would see him reinstated. Again, that sounds like the forming of the White Army, right?
Or Guaido.
Yeah, well, Guaido's not been able to form an international coalition, has he? It's just him trying to get over a fence. And on March the 26th, 2015, the war of aggression against Yemen began officially, as announced by the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. That's a weird choice of location to announce that you've gone to war. Yemen has been bombed for 6 years straight, ever since. Despite international outcry and condemnation, a war that has left hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians dead and even more wounded, a war that also brought about a Saudi-enforced blockade on Yemen, effectively manufacturing famine across the country. More than 20 million Yemenis live in famine-like conditions as vital exports are restricted and barred from entry by the Saudi-American coalition. And all the war has done so far was to prove that Yemen's Ansarullah and its allies right in its assessments that Yemen is being punished militarily for daring to break free from foreign guardianship. Yemenis were punished for claiming their right to self-determination, punished for demanding to live in a free, prosperous and democratic nation. The war has also failed to crush the Yemeni people's revolutionary spirit. Around August and September 2015, the Yemeni armed forces stated their total support for the revolution and began mobilising soldiers to Yemen's border regions in defence of their country.
Let me just stop you again, Fran.
Go on.
Sammy, who are the Houthis that we hear about all the time? Are they just Ansarullah, are they? Or is that like, because obviously you always hear it's the Houthis that are being destroyed by the Saudis, isn't it? That they're the ones who are, do you know what I mean? These are the ones you hear about in Western media.
Sammy he needs to press push to talk.
His internet might have gone again. You know what I'm talking about, though, that you often hear the Houthi-led government and stuff. I'm presuming that's Ansarullah.
Well, this war, I mean, there's a thing, isn't there, with imperialist wars, is that like after a certain point, like liberals will be in favour of them up to a certain point, where then public opinion starts to, it goes centrist for a long time first, doesn't it? Where it'll be like, yeah, we're involved in Yemen, but we'll put adverts on TV where celebrities say donate to these famines that we're causing in Yemen, right? So they'll do that thing where the support for the war starts to drink, and then it'll end up like the Afghanistan where even liberals are against it. Until the point of leaving, of course, because then that switches again, like it did with Afghanistan. Liberals were suddenly all about Afghan women, right?
Go on, continue. I'm sure.
But what I'm saying is the Houthi label that you're talking about is used by liberals. They won't say the Ansarullah socialists, will they? They will say Houthis.
Yeah, I just presume that that's who they're talking about without wanting to say the words.
I think, Sammy, we can't hear you, so you're gonna have to just butt in when you get back. I'll keep reading. It would mark the starting point of the Yemeni armed struggle in defiance against imperialist aggression. It was a struggle that the Yemeni people have been waging as the international community continued to deny the rights and their plight. A struggle that has gone unnoticed in many circles across the Western world, and unfortunately, amongst likewise anti-imperialists as well. A struggle condemned by the international community on baseless grounds, influenced by the lobbyist apparatus of the Saudi regime. Yemen has suffered under the guardianship of Saudi Arabia. For more than 4 decades, history shows that anyone who opposes this system of tutelage has been dealt with in the most horrifying manner possible. Presidents, intellectuals, opposition leaders and academics have all been assassinated by the Saudi regime for daring to reclaim their right as independent people. September the 21st revolution remains the beacon and the guiding light to which the Yemeni people have waged their people's struggle. A correctional revolution meant to straighten out the path first laid by previous revolutions. September the 21st is important because it marks a turning point of Yemeni contemporary history, a defiance against America and its imperialist aspirations. The revolution emphasised the importance of self-reliance over reliance on foreign countries. That sounds like the DPRK, right?
I was going to say Juchi Yemen.
Mm-hmm. It is a workers' revolution that unified an otherwise fragmented people. From an increase in fuel prices to all-out people's war, the Yemeni people refused to bow under pressure. Sammy, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right, go on, Tom had a question for you. Say it now, Tom.
Yeah. What I was asking before was in Western media, I mean, like BBC and other things, when they're talking about the conflict in Yemen, which obviously isn't very often, and nowadays it's not at all. They used to use the word Houthi when they were talking about the people that were being genocided by the Saudis, essentially. Now, when they say Houthi, is that just a way to say Ansarullah without saying Ansarullah, or is there an ulterior motive going on here?
Well, the head of Ansarullah, actually, his last name is Houthi, or Al-Houthi, Abdul Malik Badruddin Houthi, and it's calling them Houthis like kind of personifies an entire movement of people. Like it confines them to just one person, as they did with Syria, and like pretty much all other revolutionary movements throughout history, and they just like put.
So hold on, is it like calling somebody a Stalinist? Because it's the guy's name.
It is like that. It is like that. However, it comes with a little bit of sectarianism because the Houthi, or like Abdul Malik Badruddin Houthi and the tribe where he comes from are Shias, and they like mostly live within the mountains of Yemen as well. So that's kind of like it's basically like slander with a bit of kind of like a slander / slur sort of thing, and it also like waters it down from a mass movement to like this personality cult / like dictatorship.
Because what I was getting at was I literally had never heard the term Ansarullah until I started hearing you talk about it. Essentially, I'd only ever heard the Yemeni resistance, or not even the Yemeni resistance, because they were never posed as a resistance. They were posed as like a people under economic siege by the Saudis. That was the only way I'd ever heard about the Houthis. So that's why I was asking.
And so I actually was able to like kind of like come up with the meaning of it. Not come up with it, but like formulate it in English. And Ansarullah means, in this context, it means the oppressed who stand with God. That kind of what it literally means. Like it's kind of like liberation theology sort of stuff.
Right.
Now, what is the key link between why is Islam in the Middle East such a uniting political force? What's the principle behind that in simple terms? Because it's not something that could happen in the West, is it? Like it's not because of like, well, it's just the way Westerners are, aren't they? They're not like, you're not going to see a socialist movement in the West now united through, say, like Christianity or anything, are you? It's that time in the West has gone. What is it about Islam that fits this, Sammy?
This is actually a very good question, and the ex-leader or the founder of the Palestinian PFLP, George Habash, actually said he's a Christian, for context. He's from a Christian background, and even he said that culturally I'm a Muslim because Islam has had such a massive impact in formulating the culture of the Arab region and North Africa, and it is essentially, the culture is rooted in that, essentially, because 1400 years ago it was kind of a social revolution of like breaking the chains of like semi-slave, semi-feudal forces, and what it allowed was like at that time was like progressive forces that led to like markets or led to like an enlightenment kind of thing, which eventually led to the Islamic Golden Age, where strides were made in science and philosophy. And Ibn Khaldun, about 900 or 1,000 years ago, in the introduction of Ibn Khaldun, was the first person to determine that time was a process and not a narrative. And we can see where, and this kind of like gives the root for Marxist philosophy of like time is a process of class struggle.
Yeah. Historical dialect.
So basically,
dialect.
Yeah, it was a bit more dialectical, especially for those times. So essentially, even according to Arab Marxists, Islam is like the fabric of society. Whether you're a Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're not religious, it really has like is like the fabric of the culture and a basis for a lot of cultural norms and stuff. And that's how. And like the masses basically adhere to those cultural norms and stuff.
And I mean, I just want to point out as well, I don't know whether this is completely wrong, but I've heard certain Muslim Marxists referring to jihad when not used in a reactionary sense, like by fascist groups like Al-Qaeda and stuff like that. But the actual pure meaning of jihad could like be boiled down to a sort of class struggle almost. Like the literal
meaning of jihad is struggle.
Right. And that makes sense as to why that word is so demonized in Western culture as well today. You know, when you hear somebody say jihad, you just automatically think, well, Westerners automatically think of like Al-Qaeda, you know, ISIS, these kind of fascist reactionary groups that use the word jihad for their own ends. But it seems like it's a way to change the meaning from its actual meaning.
It's a way to hide a fascist movement, really, isn't it? It's fascist apologia, isn't it? Because you can use the word jihad to mean fascist, right? Once it means fascist, you no longer have to explain to anybody that they are fascists, right? They're jihadists instead, so it's softened the fascism. But you've also smeared the word jihad as well now, because when the Houthis say they're doing it, because as like Sammy said, this concept of Islam being the fabric of society, right? So technically, you know, revolutionary war, socialist revolution is jihad against the ruling class, right? So he instantly demonizes that word as again. That's what you know.
Yeah, but another term that they use, like the Axis of Resistance use, is mujahideen, which means strugglers or those who struggle. Like it's an adjective for the people who do the act of struggling.
Yeah.
Basically, so mujahid. So that's kind of like a less demonized word, or you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mujahideen was always used as a kind of, you know, when the Yanks were using them against the Soviets, they were like, oh, these are freedom fighters, these are, you know, peace warriors and all this kind of shit. Like
warrior for peace or whatever. Osama bin Laden was put on the New York Times as warrior for peace against communism.
Before the peace warriors went rogue and decided to destroy the Twin Towers, like
give hate a chance. They gave hate a chance. Yeah, right. Anyway, let's move on.
I was going to say we talked about this article quite a bit, haven't we?
I mean, Sammy, you've not been here for a couple of months because of travelling, so there you go. That was a good enough recap back into the Middle East, and in a couple of weeks we'll just see how it progresses, right? Hopefully.
Thank you, and also
more progress.
I just want to say thank you everyone thank you all subscribers and followers for the support to Mango Press, because honestly, without our audience, we couldn't really have made it this far.
Exactly. And we try. It's an area that is criminally underreported, isn't it, in the Western world? So we feel like we have to do it justice. So moving on. This week we're going to go through this briefly because there's a lot of he said, she said about this event. There's been elections in Russia, right? And the Communist Party has done pretty well, right? Which is good. And we're going to look into why that's good, and also why it's kind of strange for the West, as in the corporate media, to take that as a victory too. So here we go.
It's interesting. Before you read the article, I want to point out that every news site from Western news site I was kind of reading up on when this was happening, not a single one mentioned the Russian Communist Party, the CPRF or KPRF, gaining any kind of gains. Like it was completely removed from any reference to the Russian elections. Was it BBC, Sky News? Doesn't matter. All of these kind of Western media outlets just completely ignored this, which is interesting, isn't it? You think they'd use it as like fear mongering, but I don't know. It was completely whitewashed.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they used it as fear-mongering, because that does demonstrate, oh, well, communism, quote unquote, collapsed in the Soviet Union, but somehow they're becoming popular again. That's what people would think. So maybe there's something to it.
Right.
Good point.
Let's have a look at this article and we'll discuss it further. Vito, before we get into it, Vito's joined us at 6, 7 a.m. from Hong Kong. Vito, just say hello. Unmute yourself, say hello.
Hi.
Hello.
It's been great to be back.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, and it's 6 a.m. right now, so
Nice. Okay.
very great time. It's a very great time to start chatting, and yeah.
Exactly. Right. Let me get into this article, and anything you want to add in, just join in as per usual. Right.
Sure.
So, voting having closed in Russia's parliamentary elections, it appears that Russia's ruling party may have lost. That's United Russia, Putin's party. Ruling party may have lost a sizable share of its votes compared to 2016, potentially ending up with fewer than half of all ballots cast. According to the exit polls and those votes counted so far, the Communist Party, the KPRF, which is the Bolshevik party from times gone by, right, is set to be the biggest winner from the drop in support for United Russia, the governing faction backed by President Vladimir Putin. The far-right LDPR is set to come in third, almost neck and neck with the centre-left Fair Russia for Truth. The youth-orientated New People also appears to have made it past the 5% required for proportional representation, whilst the Liberal Yabloko polled only around 1%. That's a humiliation for politicians who see themselves as heirs to the post-Soviet reformers of the early 1990s. The communists
Yabloko is Navalny's little Nazi party, isn't it?
No, it's Navalny's party from maybe 10 years ago or something. He got kicked out for being racist. It's basically the legacy of Yeltsin party.
Ah, right, okay.
It's the neoliberals. As it says here, look, that's a humiliation for politicians who see themselves as the heirs to the post-Soviet reformers of the early 1990s. So they see themselves as the direct rival of Putin as well, don't they? Because they got effed over by Putin back in the 90s when they kicked Yeltsin out. Anyway, the communists are, however, the main and, if not only, national-wide opposition party that can challenge the direction of Putin and United Russia. It's always been the case, hasn't it, that the Communist Party, the opposition... This is why it was funny, like last year when the Navalny's getting called the leader of the opposition. No, he's not the leader of the opposition. He's the leader of like one opposition movement that can't even get like 1% in a poll. I think when we looked at it, he was like 13th or 9th most popular party in Russia or something. Whereas the Communist Party is solidly the opposition, right? But they've made it bigger this time. Anyway, the communists, however, are the main, if not only, national-wide opposition party that can challenge the direction of Putin and UR. As the largest opposition group, the KPRF was always likely to make gains after a turbulent few years of sanctions, rising prices, and the socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's sanctions placed against Russia by the West that it's talking about there. How does the Western media respond? The headline from the New York Times celebrates Russian election shows declining support for Putin's party. The Guardian says pro-Putin party wins elections despite declining support. The Times, Putin's party romps to victory in most corrupt election yet. In a tightrope act of rhetoric, the media coverage reveals the unusual, paradoxical claims that Russia is an absolute dictatorship, whilst simultaneously celebrating the Kremlin being handed tough results in the ballot box. There you go, more Western hypocrisy. It's always funny when it's laid bare like that, isn't it? They call Putin like this dictator that rules over Russia, but can somehow celebrate him losing elections. It's also worth asking why those in Western media are so at ease with the prospect of the communists doing well in Russia. 3 decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, few seem to be asking what it really means. Does it mean the enemy of my enemy is my friend? The allies of jailed opposition figure Alexei Navalny has attempted to take credit for what amounts to something of an election upset by pointing to their smart voting initiative, aiming to help anti-Kremlin supporters maximise the impact of their ballot depending on where they live. In reality, they advocated voting for the Communist Party the vast majority of the races. So basically, the West's attempt to hijack the Russian election was to come up with this smart voting initiative, which was what you see in the UK sometimes. You don't see it in America because obviously they have like two parties to choose from, but in countries that have more than two parties, you will get this like tactical voting, won't you, where maybe it's better to vote for another party to make sure that they win and keep the main rival out, right?
It was big over Brexit, wasn't it? There was like a big, like, if you live in this constituency, vote Lib Dem. If you live in this constituency, vote Green. This one, vote Labour, and we'll get like an anti-Brexit alliance.
Yeah, elect more anti-Brexit MPs or whatever, right? Or they just tried it in Scotland, right, against independence and failed to kick out the SNP by uniting and tactically voting. Anyway, they tried that in Russia, and because naturally, like the Communist Party are the opposition, it meant them advocating voting for the Communist Party. So there you go. That's a good spending of Ned cash for once, right? Well, the initiative may well
it'd be hilarious, wouldn't it, if the Ned accidentally reformed the USSR?
Well, they've helped.
Shit, we fucked up. Go back.
While the initiative may have been instructive for his most ardent supporters, Navalny's attempt to take credit for the strong showing the communists received is evidently an attempt to exaggerate his own importance in Russian politics. I mean, that's a Guaido moment right there, isn't it? You're like a right-wing Nazi and you're trying to claim that a communist victory is like due to you, and you somehow are going to supersede it. In reality, even with a government crackdown on their website, few voters seemed interested in the tool, and apparently few of its potential beneficiaries saw anything positive in such an endorsement. Navalny's transformation, however, from darling of the liberal West to pro-communist campaigner is worth examining as it comes from the desire to disrupt and weaken the Kremlin at all costs. It is a dangerous game to play, but is one the West has been supporting. The US and the EU have been open about the purpose of the anti-Russian sanctions to create social economic decline. Surprise, surprise, it's the same everywhere, right? To undermine the political legitimacy of united Russia and Putin. Brussels published a report already in May advocating denouncing the new Russian Duma elections as fraudulent, and to respond by expelling Russia from international institutions, imposing further anti-Russian sanctions, and increasing anti-government propaganda against Moscow. It seemed to have decided on its course of action before a single ballot was cast. Amid all the furor, it's easy to forget that Putin has historically positioned himself as a political moderate and did his part to prevent the return of the communists and keep the country on a market economy track. In the 1990s, then President Boris Yeltsin's entire liberal and pro-Western political platform collapsed when it became evident that Russia would be excluded from the new Europe, from the EU that is, while the country faced social, economic and political implosion. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation stood on the sidelines as the main opposition party, offering a return to a familiar past. Putin, serving as Prime Minister at the time, replaced Yeltsin and changed the prevailing policy by demanding that integration with the West should be done as sovereign equals, while curtailing the power of the oligarchs, many of whom have since taken up residence in the US and UK. The social economic decline was reversed and a more confident Russia emerged. It's commonly implied in the Western media that the main opposition in Russia is yet another liberal Yeltsin-like politician with a foreign policy consisting of doing whatever it takes to return to Europe, irrespective of the door being closed to Russia. In reality, the political opposition comes from the communists, who tend to believe that Russia has been too soft and weak on the West, which is why Western powers have become so comfortable with bullying Russia. The lessons of history. The absence of political principles, beside burning down the political system, irrespective of what follows, would be likely to bring about instability, radicalism, and other unforeseen consequences. On the 16th of April 1917, Vladimir Lenin arrived in St. Petersburg after 17 years in exile to lead a revolution against the Tsarist system. German intelligence services had provided Lenin with a passage to destabilize Russia, to get out of the war, and they would have been popping corks as the Bolsheviks took power. When Navalny returned from Germany in January 21, there were many who made historical comparisons to Lenin.
Sorry.
However,
couldn't hold that back.
The minuscule support for Navalny in Russia made it to some extent inappropriate, but given his recent attempts to build his credibility by contributing to the rise of the Communist Party, this historical juxtaposition might now be more appropriate. That's the end of the article, right? I mean, it's a decent article, right? Isn't it? I think anyway.
What if Navalny is actually a sleeper cell agent for like a Chinese secret agent?
I mean, there's always the case with these goons that they select, right? That they could do that. Why not? Why not, right?
Just find it funny. It's funny to hear Navalny being conflated with Lenin, when we know what he is. But I mean, I guess I can see where they're coming from, like in terms of his ineptitude has actually inadvertently given rise to massive communist gains. It's funny as fuck.
But is this not another case of like what's going to happen when? I mean, Putin. It says in the article there, doesn't it, that United Russia is what, quote unquote, centrist in terms of Russia. Maybe not in terms of Western politics, but we're not going to argue that now. But in terms of Russia, it's very much seen as like the centrist option, isn't it? Like it said in the article, which is willing to do business with a place on fair terms. I think maybe that was the original aim of United Russia. Hold on, Sammy. Maybe that's gone off the track, hasn't it? And maybe that's what's led to the rise of the Communist Party in these years since. Go on, Sammy. What were you going to say?
I was just about to say that I'm off, and I also wanted to thank everyone who's supported us over the past year.
Nice. Well, you'll be back next week, right? Well, not next week. Week
Next
after.
time, again. Yeah, exactly. I'll be back with more juicy news.
Yes.
Comes in, drops his hot Yemen takes and fucks off.
I know, yeah. I know, yeah. What's it like? Right. Anyway, so what do we make of the rise of the Communist Party in Russia?
I think I've always had this kind of opinion. I don't know whether I'm going to be vindicated or made to be a bit of a laughingstock, but I only see United Russia as being successful because of Putin. Now, I see Putin as being a very liked figure in Russia generally. The vast majority of Russians, it's a bit like when you ask Chinese people what they think of Xi Jinping. I mean, it's a lesser opinion because the vast majority of Chinese people love Xi Jinping, whereas when it comes to Russians, it's probably more like 60%, 70% maybe, fall in as well, perhaps. But how I see it is the party without Putin is nothing. It's a shell. And many people probably know that Putin is what's keeping the oligarchs in line, preventing them from doing a Ukraine and selling everything off to the West. So they need an alternative for when Putin obviously becomes too old for continued power, because he's an old man. You know, eventually he is going to have to stand down. And when he does, what will replace him in the United Russia? Will it have a neoliberal shift? Will it have a general liberal shift? You know, or will it go further right?
A centrist party could go either way as well, right?
Exactly. So what I'm thinking is, people now, especially with all the Soviet nostalgia and the fact that the West is collapsing and crumbling around everyone's ears, is making them think, well, when Putin goes, which is an inevitability, we need to perhaps have a support base ready for a seizure of power from the olden days, the Soviet times.
Well, even not even that, right? To me, it seems like the Soviet Union wasn't quite as dead as the West thought it was. Right? I think that's the key part here, isn't it? I think you're right in saying that there's possibly not going to be a replacement for Putin, but I think that's probably going to come at the end I think that's probably going to seal the end for United Russia, right? And probably pave the way for the
a restoration.
Party. Exactly. It's not a restoration of the USSR, right? Because that means
no,
that's something
not
different.
what I'm getting at.
But a restoration of the socialist
Russian
power,
Russia,
or whatever it was called.
The thing is, I mean, Russia is an absolute behemoth of a country. It's one of the richest countries when it comes to resources. It's one of the most powerful countries on earth militarily. It's got the most powerful nuclear forces in the world. So it makes the most sense. I mean, if it's run by oligarchs like the likes of Yeltsin, then it's going to be stripped bare. It's going to be sold off to the West, and it's going to become a vassal state. And the Russian people have already experienced this. They've seen what happens when an oligarch is in power, which is why Putin had to come in and kind of coup d'etat Yeltsin, essentially. And I think my opinion is that this will be what happens again, but it will be when Putin when his hold becomes too weak on power, because maybe after the next election, perhaps the Soviets, I was going to say, the communists gain more power again. It might come that you have mass communist movements in the streets calling for a restoration of Soviet power. And when I say Soviet power, I don't mean the USSR, I mean the literal Soviets. You know what I mean? Like the political body known as Soviets, workers' councils.
Moving back to like a Leninist system, basically.
Yeah, and I mean now obviously Russia has
but this
undergone.
Is the point, right? But this is what I'm trying to get at, right? Does Russia can the Communist Party do that in Russia through electoral means? Just because Russia is, like I say, the Soviet Union is not as dead as the West likes to think it is it? You just change the political system a little bit. Like, do you know what I mean? You can't change history, you can't change what people want still, and all this. So is it not that naturally it's going to come back, right?
Yeah, I completely think it is. I mean, if you think about the coup that ended the USSR as we know it today, it was literally such an underhanded thing. It was like the Ukrainian USSR, the Ukrainian Socialist Republic, and the head of the Russian Federation came together to basically undo the power of the USSR and dissolve it undemocratically. Now, if that can be done so sneakily and behind everyone's backs, then what is to say that the communists haven't learned from that in the past 30 years? And
exactly.
we're seeing with the rise of Belarus and the Union State, like we're seeing with the Soviet republics in eastern Ukraine and the ones in Georgia as well.
Yeah, because
all of these forces.
This is a point though. You've got communists in the Ukraine that are wanting to go back to those times as well, right?
And I think as well, like, you've got mass amounts of communists in the army as well, both sides of the armed forces, whether it's in Russia or the Eastern European states. I think it would, I mean, in the USA or Britain, for example, where, you know, political ideology is screened so heavily, and you're not going to have open communists in the US military anymore or anything like that. It's unrealistic to expect the army in the West to side with the people when it comes to a revolution. But in a place like Russia, I could absolutely see that happening again, and a reinstating of some kind of socialist democracy state.
Mm-hmm. If they can undo it so quickly, then why can't communism?
Yes, that's
why does it have to be so? If communism can collapse so easily, but capitalism can't, what's that about? Does it have to be? I mean, I've asked this before on some of our episodes. Do you have to follow the steps that Lenin and the Bolsheviks took, or can it be done through other means? if they can collapse it by, like you said, somebody just going into an office and being like, haha, this is my office now. Do you know what I mean? Then why can't it be done the other way?
Exactly. And that's what I think. That's where I think we're heading. And I don't think it will be in the next year. It might be, but like I think we're looking at probably more this decade, maybe next decade. But like in the next 20 years, I definitely see a reformation of. I mean, as well with the China-Russia axis you've got going on at the moment, where their relations are at the highest they've been in centuries, kind of thing. It must be hard for the Russians to look at China and say, well, we were once the foremost socialist power. We were the most powerful socialist country economically. And now China has kept on that path.
And China's not getting bullied at all, is it? All the shit that they throw at China just bounces off, right? It just does nothing. It might seem like it does if you're the reader of it, and it might but that's not affecting the existence of. Whereas this stuff did affect the existence of the USSR, didn't it?
And I think that nostalgia, when you see in a country like China that's become so powerful so quickly, and it's only through market-based socialism, maybe a kind of reevaluation of Gorbachev's policies, and how Gorbachev basically had the option to do market socialism but completely fucked it up and led to the conditions that put Yeltsin in power. That would have to be analysed, and I think Russia today could kind of follow China's economic kind of style, not in a direct copy paste situation, but they could look at it and definitely take notes from it. I mean, those two countries, if they remain strongly allied together, there's no nation on earth, no combination of nations on earth that could destroy both China and Russia. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. They're just too powerful.
Geographically, population, all manner of reasons, right? Military, everything.
Yeah, and economy.
Exactly. And a lot of people say things like, China doesn't do anything for internationalism, right? And I know maybe they don't do as much as the Soviet Union did in terms of like espionage action, right? Undercover financing of workers' movements. But the tweet that we saw today, that the most fun, they'd met with Vietnam, right? I think she had a phone call with the Communist Party of Vietnam General Secretary Nguyen Trong, and they were like, the most common strategic interest of both our countries is to safeguard like communist parties in general, our government, which is Leninism, and our socialist systems, right?
Well, both China and Vietnam, obviously they have their disagreements, everyone knows this, but every single time they have a meeting between either foreign ministers, between presidents, between whoever it is that's meeting between the two groups, they always affirm their strong ideological brotherhood together. And they say, like, look, we've got these problems can be worked out, we will work them out, but nothing will detract from our ideological brotherhood. And they always both emphasize this fact, always. And with the most recent
hold on. I think that shows why the capitalist class is so shit scared of socialism, isn't it? It's because China and Vietnam can have all the arguments in the world. They're not going to let the other one. They're not going to help destroy socialism in the other one's back garden. They're just not going to do that. I mean, maybe in the past they've had moments. They're not going to do that anymore, right? Because they've learned from it. Because that's what socialism is about, isn't it? Learning from your mistakes, patching it up with real action. That's what scares the capitalist class with those sort of statements, and that's why they have to attack them with all this subterfuge and sabotage and coups and this, that, and the other, right? Carry on.
I mean, with the most recent phone call, not the one that Xi Jinping's just had with Nguyen Trong, but with the one between Wang Yi and the foreign minister of Vietnam, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name because I'll bastardize it. Basically, they basically agreed on every point. There was essentially about one paragraph in a 20-paragraph readout which discussed the problems in the South China Sea, and they both talked about peaceful ways to work towards it. And they kind of alluded to, they didn't outright say it, but they alluded to the fact that the major problems in the South China Sea are caused by the presence of imperialists. Once the imperialists are gone, then these kind of issues will be easily worked out between the two countries. They're not difficult to work out, but with the presence of the USA, France, Britain in these waters, this is the biggest problem. And the first step before you can kind of have this reconciliation over the South China Sea is the liberation of all of the South China Sea. And obviously we know that Taiwan is still completely occupied by imperialist puppets, and it has been referred to as America's unsinkable aircraft carrier. Taiwan needs to be liberated and reunified before anything can kind of move forward between China-Viet relations, which is why Vietnam always supports China's claims over Taiwan. Like, regardless of what their kind of geopolitical disagreements are, Vietnam is a stalwart ally of defending China's sovereignty, and that's obvious when you look at Vietnam's history and how its own sovereignty has been attacked by France and the USA. You know, trying to.
There's more and more countries joining that alliance, aren't there, in the world? Such and such, the ones that we talked about earlier on in the show, places in the Middle East that maybe don't seem as left-wing on surface level, but then you understand that it's a mass movement of the people, right? Any anti-imperialist / communist should support a mass movement of the people, especially if it's in matters of self-determination. That should be like the base position. Everything else can come after that. You can build on that foundation afterwards, but you should respect people's, right to self-determine their own destiny in any which way they choose. Just because they don't have the most purist views on Marxism doesn't mean that you turn your back on them and let the imperialist bombshell, murder, invade, steal, sabotage. Do you know what I mean? It's that idea, isn't it? That's what it comes down to. And the more socialist a place is, the more likely it is to be able to defend from those attempts to knock it out, because socialist governments by design learn from the mistakes of the past. That's why socialism becomes stronger and stronger, doesn't it? And I think that alone is probably why Russia will continue to move into the socialist sphere of influence. And what's interesting, before we move on to the final chat of the show, what's interesting with Russia drifting that way again is that it's pulling Germany with it as well, right? I wonder what Marx and Lenin would, if they could sit down and talk and see that happening, would say to each other, right? Because they're being proved right again, right?
Well, I mean, Germany, obviously, as the economic heartland of Europe, basically relies on trade with China so much more than kind of the small European states and the Atlantic European states like Spain and France and these kind of countries. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you see in France kind of furious at the moment over the AUKUS alliance and or AUKUS, however you want to pronounce that bullshit, purely because they weren't invited into it, essentially.
It's just coping. It's nothing to be celebrating. It's
but in the same breath, Germany is coming out and going, well, we don't want anything to do with your new Cold War. They are literally, and in the same breath, they are building or completing the pipelines between Russia and Germany and integrating their industry. And there's many forces within Germany that want a detente with Russia, like a political diplomatic detente, because obviously with Germany it's the base of NATO, isn't it? It's where America stores its nuclear missiles. It's where all of America's bomber forces are that are pointed at Russia in Europe. This puts a massive target on Germany's back as well.
There's more imperialist bases in Germany than any other country in the world, I believe.
Probably
France has them, the UK and the US, and it's all just from the World War II splitting of Germany still, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, with regards to this, I mean, Germany knows better than any other country on earth what happens when you poke the Russian bear, don't they? I mean, they got absolutely obliterated by the Soviet Union, and in the most dramatic way possible. Probably the most destroyed country up until the destruction of Korea, if not more so, because of the retribution that they brought down upon themselves with their Nazi attacks into the heart of the USSR. And obviously with it now, I'm sure many Germans look at their position in Europe and think, why are we being used as the tip of the spear, the tip of NATO's spear again against Russia, when we know what happens when that is done? I mean, now Russia is leagues more powerful than the USSR ever was. The amount of nuclear missiles that Russia holds, regardless of nuclear forces, that their conventional forces are some of the most powerful on earth, absolutely dwarfing Germany's. So it makes absolute geopolitical sense for Germany to align itself with the anti-imperialist alliance, ironically, whereas France, you can completely understand why they want their imperialist desires to continue.
Mm-hmm.
They are the most powerful military in West Europe. They have satellite colonies themselves in the Pacific. So they were kind of really pissed off by the AUKUS alliance because they were excluded from the Pacific imperialism that the USA wants to go gallivanting around doing, but also like they're ostracized from the kind of geopolitical closeness to Russia that would make it worthwhile joining the anti-imperialist alliance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right,
that's how I see it.
Right, let's get on to the final topic. Sorry, I'm eating a mint. Very rude of me. Very rude of me. But then again, fat boy, lockdown fat, right?
Yeah.
This week you've seen all the Western commentators going on about this property development company in China that has caused mass hysteria on the stock market, and it's kind of fizzled out a little bit now, hasn't it? I'm not seeing anything today, but can you explain what's been going on? And also, Xena and Vito, can you tell us a little bit about the view from the other side? Tom, you go first. Just give us a brief.
All right, so an overview of the situation, and Vito and Xena, just jump in if I say anything wrong here, because I'm not economically trained, so I might.
Don't worry, I'm not really economically trained either. So
basically, he's saying he's a scouser. Of course, he's not economically trained.
Cheeky
Liverpool.
Bastard. Anyway, so essentially, what's happened is there's this large Hong Kong and Guangzhou-based real estate company called Evergrande. When I say large, I mean it's responsible for somewhere in the region of 14% of China's annual GDP. So it's a massive housing corporation. It builds houses. It provides credit for the building of houses. It sells mortgages, all these kind of things. It's a very capitalist company. It is kind of constrained by Chinese law, of course, but there have been a lot of news cases in China regarding this company and them not building houses that they promised to build, or the houses they promised to build have been delayed, all various things. Now, up until 2 weeks ago, I think it was, it started to go into administration. So it essentially couldn't pay back any of its debts. Its debts were mounting up to the point that, it was defaulting on its debts, essentially. It was looking like it was going to have to go into bankruptcy. And immediately, Gordon Chang and his little cabal of China Watcher friends all started saying that it was the end of China.
The prophecy.
Again.
How many times do you think Gordon Chang jumps out of bed in the morning? He's like, "Today's the day the prophecy comes true."
His alarm clock just says China's going to collapse. China's going to collapse as he wakes up. Anyway, so he was on about it. I mean, all the fucking blue checks on Twitter were talking about it, calling it the Lehman Brothers moment for China, which, as we know, that was the kind of the Western tipping point to the 2008 economic crisis. Which also led to the credit crunch all across Europe. Caused decades of austerity in Europe, caused the biggest economic crisis. A decade, yeah.
Maybe a decade.
But still, that's quite long. A decade, to be fair.
A decade of austerity is quite long. I mean, it is, isn't it?
It felt like longer. Now, I think this 2008 is probably the reason why so many of today's youth are radicalized to be interested in socialism.
It's like the same with Russia, right? It's like after like 20 to 30 years of the reforms in Russia, people would be like alienated. They wanted the Communist Party of Russia to come back, and now they got a Communist Party. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Do carry on, Tom.
So essentially, what happened here was there was all the blue ticks, all the liberals, all them standard crowd, Satellite Boy and co, all coming out and saying that China's collapse is imminent. Everyone starts short selling your stocks in the company and all this. China immediately put a ban on trading of the stock the second that the crisis was kind of coming out. So you couldn't basically buy and sell stocks in the company, essentially. And they basically started to set up shell companies, 3 large state-owned shell companies, with the intention to break the company up, Evergrande up, into 3 separate corps in different locations in China.
No, sorry, Tom. It's now 4 parts.
4 parts, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Right.
They include the real estate development, finance, electric vehicles, and commercial enterprises. They were expected to sell to individual companies and even local governments. So now they're quietly saying they're nationalizing Evergrande.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay. Yeah, so essentially, all of the estimations were that China was going to go the way of the USA, basically bailing out the banks, or in this case Evergrande. I use banks because that's obviously what happened in America, at the expense of the people who had taken the credit from the banks in the USA, or the credit which in China's case, in Evergrande's case, was the houses, the properties which hadn't yet been constructed, that many people had already paid a surplus towards, as kind of like a holding deposit kind of thing. Now, it seems like what China's done, correct me if I'm wrong here, Vito, is the opposite, and China is basically saying, well, fuck you, Evergrande, we're not bailing you out, we're not bailing your creditors out, and we're not bailing the CEO and all that out. You can all fucking rot, but we will ensure that these new state-owned companies, which will take over the operations of Evergrande, will accomplish the contracts that Evergrande had already signed, the houses to be built. So essentially it's a mirror image to 2008, but it's what 2008 could have been if the USA had bailed the people out rather than the banks. That's how I see it. And I think that's why we're not hearing any... Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's why we're not hearing about it as well now. You know, when you brought this up, you said, it's not really been in the news since. It's not really been in the news because the massive collapse didn't come.
Exactly.
If the massive collapse came, it would be the only thing in the news, because it would have also brought the whole Western world crashing down with it. But the fact that... that's another point, I'll get onto that in just a sec. But the fact that China's basically put all these provisions in place, they basically banned the sale and buying of the stocks. They've ensured the contracts that Evergrande's already kind of signed. They've de facto nationalized Evergrande without doing it, and basically said to the banks that Evergrande owes the debt to. They basically said that your debt payments from Evergrande are going to be frozen, so that even the banks in China are not getting their debt back at the moment, and they might have to swallow the losses because China sees it more important that the people who have paid
for the house
get the house. Yeah, exactly. Like people who need ports get ports. It's the same kind of situation. Now, one thing I was just going to bring up before I cede the floor would be that obviously this company is absolutely enormous. It's because it's a Hong Kong based company. That's where its head offices are. Its head offices are in Guangzhou, I believe, or Fujian. I can't remember exactly, but essentially a lot of the business is done through Hong Kong, through the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which obviously gives foreign companies, foreign corporations the ability to buy the stocks and shares there in a way that it's much more difficult for them to do if it was a mainland listed company. Now, this is interesting because if you look at who holds a majority of Evergrande's stocks, it's American banks, it's Western government pension funds, including the British government pension fund, the Australian government pension fund, and the United States government welfare fund. All three of those hold a huge number of Evergrande stocks. And Lehman Brothers, the infamous ones we were talking about earlier from 2008, they hold a good deal of the stocks. And some other American banks do as well. HSBC, I believe, holds a fair few number as well. So this is really funny because when China says fuck you to the stockholders, that doesn't just mean the Chinese bourgeoisie who own the company. It also means a huge number of Western finance corporations which rely on this finance or relied upon this finance in order to basically what's the word?
Is that not the reason why the Western media and stuff went after Xi during the anti-corruption drive as well, again, because it was them that was losing out? They're always quite honest, aren't they? Because if you just have to look, they're like moaning because China's not bailing out the capitalist class, right?
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
They're just sulking and not saying anything about it anymore because they know they're not going to get bailed out. Then they've got to just write these losses off because that's the stock market and that's the free market, right? Hey ho, those numbers are just gone off the machine. You can't put them back on. Like, they're just gone, right?
Numbers go by.
Exactly.
Line go down.
Doing that meme where the money's coming out of the printer and they're all crying. It's that, isn't it? That's why they attack China so much. Zena, I know Vito, you're going to have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to go to Zena first because she said she doesn't have a lot, but could say a little bit.
Yeah, I can contribute 1 or 2 points. Like for the Evergrande situation, I have to point out one factor because you all know the 14 5-year plan for China.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I mean, this one after they introduced that plan is basically one of the factor is like they want to curtail the soaring housing price. You know, like there's already a huge housing bubbles in China, price bubble. So I think many people will say the government will bail out Evergrande because like the company is huge. So probably the government still trying to, in order to like maybe to stabilize the economy or something. But this time, I don't think you will bail out Evergrande, especially under a situation where like Chinese government wants to regulate the housing market as well, especially for the property companies like Evergrande or any other property companies.
It's a perfect time to do that, right?
Yes, and also maybe basically corresponding to the current situation. Yeah, so there's no way the Chinese government will bail out Evergrande, but like and as a Chinese saying goes, like 杀鸡儆猴, which means like to kill the chicken to deter the monkeys. I believe Vito Will heard about it before.
Maybe
It's-
once or twice. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful phrase. That it's an absolutely beautiful idiom. I love it.
Yeah, it's basically saying like the Chinese government definitely wants to set an example. Maybe like they'll just take Evergrande as an example to deter other real
Exactly.
estate companies.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Why
like-
not make an example
yeah.
of the capitalists when they like mess up? You've got to take that chance.
Yeah,
as-
exactly.
as a
I mean,
socialist.
like before, the Chinese government already gave them a lot of opportunities, but like they just going on with the housing. I mean, especially the housing price. Many people in China already like very upset with the increasing housing price.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like it's about time. It's about time.
Yes, exactly. That is a
Also,
very good point.
just before Vito comes in, there's something else I just want to add on. Essentially, just how many years ago was the three red lines policy, the Santiao Hongxian? Was that last year?
I think it's last year. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact wording of that policy, but essentially it was a crackdown on large housing companies like this, wasn't it, and other large finance companies as well, and it basically laid out 3 red lines which these companies could not cross, or they would be sanctioned and broken up and nationalized and all these other horrible words to capitalists that they don't like. And these red lines were regarding how much capital they had to hold relative to their debt, how much they could lend, all these various things, and it was essentially to prevent a credit collapse, a credit crunch from happening in China. So this has been in the run-ins for a year, essentially, this kind of crackdown, and it seems as though the Evergrande has failed to abide by these red lines, which is why it's going to be so easy for the CPC to break them up. Well, not the CPC, it's the People's Bank of China that will be doing this, but it'll be so easy for them to break this company up because they've violated the three red lines. That's like trying to say yellow lorry, red lorry. It's difficult, that 3 red lines policy, and this. Essentially, China also has insulated markets. So whereas in the West, where it's kind of just like a free market, free for all, where chaos just kind of begets chaos and causes more problems throughout the entire market.
You can have Lehman Brothers moments, right?
Yeah, exactly. Whilst in China, like the housing market is kind of isolated from the food market and the general finance
even
market.
the stock market in China is more like Las Vegas, right? It's just a game that's on top of the economy. You're just playing a game based on the economy, right?
Yeah.
It's not penned to it like in the US.
Yeah, and essentially...
This is an example of that, though. Do carry on.
Even if Evergrande was to collapse in the most violent way that the propagandists are predicting, and Gordon Chang got the biggest erection of his life watching it happen...
Horrible thought.
Yeah, sorry.
That to us.
Yeah, while you're all picturing that, even if that did happen, right? It would not cause a complete market collapse in China. It would potentially cause temporary short-term chaos within the housing sector. But as I say, that with that being insulated from the rest of the market, essentially, it means that fire wouldn't spread in the way that it does in the quote-unquote liberal democracies of the West. Now, Vito, do tell us more.
Yeah, so right now I'm looking at the debt the debt crisis of individual real estate companies. What it means that right now, like Tina said, the government has put out its policies regarding housing markets, and that included Hong Kong as well. And you might have heard, I don't know if you guys might have heard, but the government of Hong Kong have been really trying to take care of the problems with the with the housings that have been built and like before the Hanover, and they're still experiencing the sort of not in a sense of people like the people discontent with the housing safety and like the lack of regulations and all that. And I think they're looking at what's happening in Hong Kong as to say, well, we should do more to pressure the real estate companies to actually not push like the sort of like high-end prices to customers, that they like the exuberant prices that people can't afford to live in. So they're and also with the public housing, which is another like a thing that the government has been campaigning to.
This is the government of Hong Kong you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're like the low income people have to apply for like a voucher system, like in a voucher system to actually like live. But since because of the voucher system led to a really long queue, and that was like another. And the building's already been set up, and then like the people, like the government has needs to be more proactive when it comes to these situations. And when the Chinese government finally saying, the people should be living in houses, not for the speculators to speculate. That so like gives a signal to the tycoons, the real estate tycoons, that they should abide by what the Chinese government has been pushing, and not trying to play the systems whatever they wanted to. So that led to the massive inequality in housing, also in business and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Nice. Right, and one last topic, because we've got like 10 minutes left, that's just happened whilst the show was going on. Well, just before, so it's probably best we touch upon it.
Sure.
The news that Meng, is it Wang Zhou? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Meng Wanzhou. They're finally letting her out. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the story there? Anybody want to discuss that? Tom, Zena, Leo? Anyone?
I mean, it's essentially what happened was she was arrested in Canada. I think 2 years ago now. Maybe it was last year. I don't know. The pandemic's done a number on my perception of time.
Time just goes now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
10 years just goes by.
Essentially, Huawei, which she is the CEO or the CFO, I think it might be the CFO of.
This was part of the US's attacks on Huawei just at the start.
Yeah.
Like COVID, wasn't it?
It was during the Trump administration, so it would have been at least 2 years ago. Essentially, what had happened was Meng was flying from Shenzhen to Canada, somewhere in Canada, and
a house in Canada or something.
I don't even think it was a house. I think she was just visiting someone. I could be wrong about that.
She's in house arrest in her own property there.
Okay. Well, basically, she was intercepted by the police. They arrested her, the Canadian police, on behalf of a warrant from the USA. And as you say, she's been under house arrest since. Now, basically what she was arrested for was a multitude of bullshit crimes, essentially. The main one was that Huawei themselves had been accused of
working with Iran.
Yeah, invalidating the US sanctions on Iran, which is absolutely ludicrous, because obviously they are unilateral US sanctions. They are not UN sanctions. There's no obligation for a non-American individual to abide by them. Now, essentially,
this is a case of them thinking they're world police, right?
I mean, it's even so, it's bullshit. The thing they accused her of, she didn't do. I mean, she is not responsible for all of Huawei anyway. It would have had to have gone through multiple channels, including HSBC, which is obviously British owned, and another couple of large shareholders.
If anybody doesn't know, HSBC is the colonial bank that Britain set up in Hong Kong to launder money out of China. Their imperial, basically. That's the basic story of it.
the silver dealers. So essentially, there was this. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to evade sanctions. As you can see, it's all conspiracy too. Like there was no actual crime committed, and the evidence that they posed to Mung in the extradition hearing was kind of like completely debunked by Mung's lawyers. Like Mung's lawyers brought forth fantastic rebukes to every single thing the USA said, and the USA basically said, yeah, well, you're not allowed to use them lawyers anymore. They are not approved lawyers or some bullshit like this. They absolutely just stitched her up proper. Now, I haven't actually read the article we've got on screen at the moment, so I don't really know what the agreement they've come to with Mung is, but I believe they are letting her, they're dropping the extradition request because they were asking for an extradition to the USA, which probably would have meant a long stint in an American jail, or some kind of hostage situation. But they've dropped that, and they've said they will drop all charges related to her in 2023. Is it, Vito?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the fuck that's all about, because if they say they're dropping the charges, then surely they have no legal jurisdiction or right to.
No, the DOJ would hold off from prosecuting Ms. Mang until December 2022 if she complied with conditions set by court. With eventually dropped.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I mean, like this has had massive traction in China. This case, like not many people in the West even know about it. But like one of the other articles I sent through to you before, Fran, is from the Global Times. They put forward a petition, with basically a petition to free Meng Wanzhou, and it got 5 million signatures in one day. Like, imagine, it's just crazy to think that, like, in the UK, if a government petition gets 100,000 signatures, it has to be debated in Parliament. Like, nothing has to be done about it. It just has to be talked about in Parliament. That's like part of the British democratic values or whatever. But like, it's just funny that, like, you know, the Chinese petition gained 50 times that in one day.
It's really I mean, a lot of like the press is hoping that the release of Mang would pave the way for the release of Queen Michaels from got detained in China for spying, taking photos illegally of the Chinese military equipment. So for me, that was they're really reeling on like what would happen if they came to like some sort of a hostage situation where they swap prisoners and sort of stuff like that. But yeah, no.
Is that a US spy?
Is she allowed to go back to China now?
Yeah, she's allowed to go back to China, but she would have to.
Well, once she's back in China, that's
like,
it, right?
No, they're saying that she's still gonna they're holding off prosecution. Like they're still on the case on Mang, even though that she's gonna come back to China. So that would be interesting because she compromised a bit, saying that she admitted to making false statements to the HSBC after HSBC said that there might be irregularities for her trip to Iran to do business, 5G communications and all that.
Yeah, I mean, with that prisoner swap you were talking about before, Vito, was that an American spy? Was it?
No, they're both Canadians. They're both Canadians.
Because I heard
one of them is NGO human rights advocate or something.
I've heard that the deal had been negotiated purely through America and China via Meng Wanzhou. And as a result, I don't know how true this is. I saw it on Twitter, so obviously you can't take everything you see on Twitter. But they basically said that, and it was a relatively accurate China analyst I saw that said this, had said that basically Canada is the biggest loser from this deal because they could have negotiated themselves with Meng Wanzhou, with China, and basically got a prisoner swap themselves. But they've now missed out on this opportunity because America has basically fucked their vassal state over once again and just gone over their heads and done the deal on their behalf. Yeah. What do you think about that, Vito? Do you think that's possible? Like Canada's just been cut out of this and they might not even get what they want here?
Yeah, the whole thing is that, like with Canada, I think the whole arrest is to let Canada to have more leverage with America in terms of like what they can do with the technology sector, what they could do with the economic sector, like basically driving Huawei's technologies out of both of like the US and Canada, but that didn't really do much because they only could rely on countries that were from like I think Norway, Ericsson, and that is like more pricey. I've heard is more pricey than the Huawei. They're not like do much for the people who need like telecommunication, like the devices to know what's going on with their businesses, like agriculture and stuff like that. I don't think they.
I believe though, Vito.
Do much. Yeah.
I believe that like even with all this sort of quote unquote end of the line for Meng and her freedom, right? I've seen an article today, I'm pretty sure, about the US doing some microchip deals with Huawei as well. Like it's funny how these things come along at the same time, isn't it? And I think that fits, Tom, with what you're saying about Canada losing out, isn't it? Because the US has used this for its own gain to ease off a bit on. Because these geopolitical battles, right? When you have the Cold War, all throughout the previous Cold War between the USSR and the US, there would be these moments where relationships would warm a little bit, right? And they would, Gorbachev would visit the US or something. Do you know what I mean? Or Nixon would go there, or whatever, right? They would have these moments where it would seem everything's calm. So it's almost like the US has used that to gain one of those moments, hasn't it? Where it can sit down with China, come to an agreement where, oh yeah, we'll let her free, but now you've signed some microchip deals with American companies, tying Huawei's production chain back to the US, so the US can economically save itself in a way. I mean, it happens, doesn't it? Because all the way through this show, we've been talking about events where, well, not all the way, but the economics about China part, like Tom said, the US, the UK, Australia, they all had their economies and governments tied up in the Chinese economy. So is it really in their interests to completely collapse this country? Well, it's not, is it? It's in their interests to try and make it toe a certain line to their advantage, right? Which is what you see they've just done now. So they've basically kidnapped her in order to get a microchip deal out of Huawei, right? And Canada's been the lackey for that. Yeah, that's what it's amounted to.
That doesn't really, help immensely for Canada.
Well, Canada gets nothing. They get nothing. They lost out. They were just like the holding cell that could hold this citizen. So the US could do that thing where it pretends it's innocent still. It could use a proxy. Canada just got used like ISIS get used, a proxy to hold this economic, piece of economic sabotage. It's the same as when East India Company would show up and take somebody out onto a boat and hold them captive over a deal or whatever. It's literally the same.
Mm-hmm. It's really funny though, isn't it? Because it just all goes back once again to Deng Xiaoping and the opening and reform, and where everyone in the West was like hailing Deng Xiaoping as like the great liberalizer of China, the man that was going to come in and change China for the better and make everything democratic and capitalist again and all that, and do not even a Khrushchev, probably a Gorbachev or a Yeltsin. That's probably where they thought Deng was. And like Deng himself, I remember there was a line where he said something along the lines of, I met this man Gorbachev, I do not like this man, he is a stupid man, or something like that. I'm bastardizing the quote a little bit, but it was words very much so to that effect. Deng was so much more intelligent than Gorbachev. He had so much more of a wide-reaching view, and he knew that that the Americans and the capitalists in the West would sell China the rope with which they would use to hang themselves. And Xi Jinping is basically the gallowsman, putting that rope on the gallows and saying, right, okay, we've learned how to build the rope now. You've built the gallows for us. Now step in and put your neck in it, because you're all fucking doomed. Because like the West has supplicated itself so much to China by forcing all of its industry there, by investing so much of its capital in China's rejuvenation, under the pretense that China was now a capitalist ally. And China's just gone, nope, that's not ever what the plan was. If you'd read any of our books, you'd know that wasn't the plan. But you idiots thought you were so much wiser than us. You thought you had one-upped us. You thought you'd beaten us at our own game. And now they're just realizing that China is actually beating them at their own game. They've taken this capitalist beast and tamed it and made it their own. Not become capitalists, but used capitalism to destroy capitalism.
Well, it's an example of it, isn't it?
They use the capital to destroy capitalists.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
How else does a state? How else does a socialist state, take control of a state's housing stock? Well, it does it through either does it like militarily by rounding up the owners of the place, or it does it through economic sabotage, which is what you've just seen. It's kind of like,
it's kind of like how France have been shoved off by Australia and the United States. Like they get like they just Australia and the United States just got off, just took the France's 90 billion nuclear submarine off, and then instead get their own nuclear submarines that probably didn't do.
But that's capitalism. If it's not, they'll just cast you off at any point.
And it's like,
hold on,
now
Xena just sent this picture in. Hold on, Vito. Okay. Xeno just sent this picture into the Discord chat saying, look, there you go, Meng's going home today. So there you go, going back to China straight away. Carry on, Vito.
Yeah, so it's like a he said, she said kind of thing where France accuses the United States and Australia that they're like, especially when it comes to their arms agreement, that it's been like promised that France would still have their nuclear submarines operational in Australia, but Australia and the United States and the UK said that, we gave you a notice in advance that we're gonna do the shit, and now it's like the intra-empires fighting each other just to like, it's a little bit weird how this sort of stuff had to how this sort of stuff that happened from countries like the United States and the countries that they're of its vassal states, where they kind of like playing off each other and stuff like that. So
I think
this is the principal tenet of capitalism, isn't it? It's capitalists will always undercut each other to try and get the deal. It doesn't matter what the deal is.
I'm pretty sure Marx, just read Marx, Capitalists just read Marx. They would understand that. Why am I getting fucked over? Just read Marx, so you'll find out why.
Yeah, he wrote a whole 4-volume book explaining why your system is fucking dog shit and you'll always fucking rap fuck each other because that's just inherent to your class. But I mean, what we're seeing right now is Karl Marx's Capital in real life. We're watching it happen in front of our very eyes, unfolding. An 1880s book is happening, in front of our very eyes, and I mean it's so basic. Like they're literally doing everything that Marx was like, yeah, they're going to do this, and this was kind of like Marx's preconditions to like the great socialist revolution that would like sweep the world, not in a Trotskyist sense, but like once the big empires crumble, then there's nothing to constrain the people from wielding power then, and we're almost at that stage in terms of human development, whereby we now have the most powerful country on earth is a socialist power. That is, it's hard to argue against that. I mean, everyone relies on China.
It's not just that, right? It's a strong socialist power with 4 other staunch socialist allies, right? That all bounce off each other, and then now a collection of other countries that have been bullied by, had socialist revolutions collapsed in, etc., all starting to, we don't have the non-aligned movement anymore because that didn't work, did it? The non-aligned movement just ended up in the USSR getting isolated and it collapsing, and then everybody lost out. The whole world lost out, didn't it? Because of the end of the USSR, right? But now, we don't have a non-aligned movement in this day and age. It's one side or the other, and you're seeing the big players, Iran, Venezuela, all these countries. People go on about, you think they're AES countries or whatever. Well, no, nobody's saying they're socialist, right? But they're supporters. They're a country that's not going to do any harm to socialist powers, and they're going to let socialism bloom wherever it appears, right? They're not going to interfere with it, and that's the big difference. Nobody's suggesting that they're AES, right? This stupid phrase that gets thrown about.
The thing with this as well, though, is, I mean, with Russia, and when Russia was the foremost socialist power, Russia is not an integral nation for world trade. I mean, it is on the European continent, and it is to some extent in Asia, but the entire world doesn't rely on Russia, which was why it was possible for the USSR to be blockaded and basically, turned behind the Iron Curtain and hidden away, and don't look at them, they're evil and all this. But China has always been, historically, China and India have always been the centers of world trade. Literally,
well, like 3/4 of the world's population live in China and India, right?
Exactly.
One area alone.
Yeah, and I mean, these two countries, I use India because, I mean, these are both examples of basically the hub of world trade. I mean, throughout all of human history, except for the past 100 years, they have been the center of world trade. They've been the most powerful countries economically. They've been huge powers on the world stage. It was only with the rise of capitalism in the Anglosphere.
Imagine a socialist China and India and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, when India falls to it, which it will, because the powerful socialist forces in India are like unrivaled in terms of like other opposition
biggest
forces
strike
around
in the world.
Yeah.
This year.
When the inevitable happens and India goes red, that's it. That's game over for the rest of the world. But like the point is here, the Anglosphere and the rise of Anglo capitalism under America, Britain, and France, and all these other Western empires is a blip on the world stage. Like Europeans, I mean, Fran, you will know this as much as I do. Our history taught to us in school is all about like European history. It's seen as like the pinnacle of the world. You rarely learn anything about the rest of the world all the way up until like kind of the 1800s, because the rest of the world hadn't been discovered yet by these countries. In so far as that, like their world was Europe, and Europe is a small place.
This animal didn't exist until Charles Darwin found it, right? Regardless of whether some native indigenous had been like living amongst them for thousands of years. It didn't exist until Darwin came along and wrote it down, right? Yeah.
But this blip it's a short-lived blip, and it was only possible because of the sheer military might of the East India Company, really, that has allowed this Anglo capital sphere to kind of survive for 200 years. It's 200 years out of what, 5,000, 6,000 years of human development. It's a blip. And very soon, what we're seeing now is the return to normalcy, as was it Franklin D. Roosevelt said that phrase? It's the return to normalcy. It was some Yankee president, I don't know who, but we are seeing the return to global normalcy, where China is regaining its rightful spot as the most powerful economic country on earth. But we're seeing China more united than it's ever been in history. Obviously throughout history, it's always been in a period of civil war, strife, all this kind of thing. But China today is united around its government. The government holds a terrifying level of mass support that the USSR didn't even achieve in terms of pure numerical support. The Chinese system has proved itself optimal for China's conditions, and the Chinese people wholeheartedly support it. So we are witnessing the return to this kind of situation, and I think America thinks it can take on Eurasia as a kind of an entity, but they don't realize that their 300 million doesn't really factor into the enormous power of the 5 billion people that live in Eurasia, and it's going to be a rude awakening for them if they do ever try and start a hot war with China and Russia, because either the world will end in nuclear fire, or we will see the complete destruction of the United States as we know it today. The United States is the last bastion of empire that exists really today. I mean, there's holdovers like There's holdovers like, Britain, France, but these are absolute blips. They're just pathetic little weak spots. Like, they'd be mopped up in seconds if America wasn't there to defend them. Which is why Britain hates Russia so much even today, because they know that they are the existential threat to the British capitalist island.
Can mess around with France all they want, right, to and fro, but Russia would just... If the Bolsheviks had made it west and to Britain and France, if the Bolsheviks had have swept all the way across Europe in World War II, Britain would have been knocked out weeks later, right? Britain couldn't fight against the Germans, right? The Bolsheviks can get across the Channel quicker than the Americans can get across the Atlantic.
They wouldn't even need to. If they took Paris and just sat there looking over the Channel, the British working class would just rise up and the British army would have sided with them, and that would have been the end.
Especially back then as well. So, I mean, it's that case, isn't it? All these ex-imperial, the European imperial vassals are the paperist of tigers. I think that's a direct mouth quote. The paperist of tigers, right? Yeah, right.
Doesn't really work in either language, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, exactly. And the US is the consolidation of that up until whatever happens next, right? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've discussed with Russia going red again, or more red, China, Russia allying themselves together. China
Hold on. Both countries have arguably gone more red in the last 10 years, right? You've had Xi Jinping come in China and really swing the Communist Party back on track, right? And then you've had the rise of the Communist Party in Russia, which is, toes the line of the rise of socialist movements in the West because of 10 years of austerity, Thatcherism, neoliberalism, capitalism, just not being able to answer the question. It's not organised enough, is it? Because it fights back against all those things, because if you do that and you start doing it, you might have to keep putting in money. Once you've nationalised public transport, where does it stop? You have crazy things like nationalised healthcare after that, right? And God forbid you have to pay people's health bill, right? So it's just that, isn't it? They don't want this tumble effect to go on. We're going to end the show there because it's 2 hours we're on. Right. Are we gonna switch to the fan room for 10 minutes? It's
yeah.
We'll have 10 minutes of Xena. You can come if you want. We can, and Artsy as well if you want. We hang out with fans afterwards, Xena. So if you want to come and just with the Patreons, and just chat with them for 10 minutes if you want to come. I know it's really early for you.
Yeah.
You might want to go up and get your breakfast, but yes. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Zena. I hope you like get up at 5 a.m. more and come back on, because it's been a pleasure to have you back.
Yeah, it's 5 a.m. here. Like, yeah. And also, like, my city is currently under like partially lockdown because like we have 200 cases, coronavirus cases. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh right, where are you, Zena? If you don't mind me asking. Oh well, I'll just chat with you in the thingy room.
No worries, I live in Xiamen. Nobody's gonna.
Oh yeah, that was like one of
Yeah.
the areas that got affected, and now
Yeah,
they're
like,
doing like a total
You
lockdown.
can easily guess where I locate because like in the whole China, it's basically Xiamen currently has the most cases.
Are you all getting tested?
I've been tested for 6 times, and today I'm going to do another test. So it's crazy.
Good on you. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why it takes.
go.
There was a little breakout in Wuhan a couple of weeks ago, and like they tested the entire city, 12 million people in 2 weeks. Absolutely
Yeah, same in
insane.
Xiamen.
I don't think they've done 12 million tests in all of Britain in 3 years.
Exactly. Right, Vito, thanks for getting up also. God knows what o'clock.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, both of you. I mean, Vito, you always join, but you, Zena, get yourself on the show again. Artsy, that painting is looking banging.
Yes,
Thank
Yeah, it's
you.
very serene. Very serene.
really great
Yes.
job, Artie.
It's
What
beautiful.
was that? Oh, thank you. Y'all are amazing. What a good discussion today. It was really interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think it's really just like the whole like feeling that you're watching artsy paints and then you just want to have more say out of how wonderful it is when it's like just wow. Yeah. Hopefully
It's amazing.
Hopefully
It looks
we'll,
like a window.
Yeah.
It looks like a window.
Oh my
It looks like, to me, I'm sat looking. Artsy just sat at the window. There you go. Lovely. Apart from the like planet in the background, that kind of.
Did you notice the mango tree that is?
Oh yeah, I see it.
here? Yeah, it's very subtle. Otherwise, people would be like, "Why is there a mango tree?" Like, by the mountains? But you know, it's there. Okay.
That's fine. Tom, you can see that, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Nice, beautiful. Artsy, plug yourself, because somebody was saying in the chat they wish they could get your stuff. I'm sat wearing your Kim t-shirt that you did like a few episodes ago. You can buy Artsy's stuff on like t-shirts and stuff. Whereabouts is that?
Yeah, so you can find me at artsymarxist.com. My links are like, I've got my Pixel site on there, which is where you can get t-shirts, mugs, prints, all that. And then you can also support me on Patreon, which helps me continue to like buy art supplies and stuff. But all those links are on my website at artsymarxist.com. And then you can follow me at Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at artsy_Marxist. So
Nice. There you go. Easy to find. Right.
yeah.
Let me do our stuff. Hold on. Let me get you up there in the corner. There you go. Right.
So underprepared. Also, just before you go for the plugin, I love the graphic you chose for the first birthday special. Little bit of Pu Jinping there.
I wanted us to get censored. So it gets taken down. Right. Don't forget, if you're that way inclined, you can go and buy a mug and all that stuff on his website. If you can't find this website, it's like Teespring. I'm not going to give the link out. If you want it, you have to message us on Twitter and I'll send you the link. We've got our Patreon, just like Artsy. You can join ours, join hers, join both. Right? Search Patreon Mango Press. Yeah, that's it. We'll be back on Thursday. Oh no, wait, one more. We've got the TikTok. Don't forget, join the TikTok. Harrison winds people up on there, right? What was he posting this week, Tom? You remember?
He was some guy like commented on one of the videos saying like, "Are you guys unironic DPRK supporters?" And then
Yeah.
like And then like he just replied to himself underneath like, never mind, I've been back through your videos. I'm out of here. Yeah, bye. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, capitalist ruined dog.
You don't defend the DPRK, do you? They all have 28 haircuts. Right, anyway. If you're a patron and you're on our Discord, you can join on for 10 minutes on there. I won't keep you. People, I'm going to switch you down. I'm going to let the music play out. All right, see you later.
Yeah.